My son looked me in the eye across my own kitchen table and told me I owed him $300,000. Not asked. Told. And his wife sat right beside him, nodding like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I smiled. I said, "Let me think about it." 48 hours later, I was on a one-way flight to Scottsdale, Arizona, and my phone was at the bottom of a dumpster 2 blocks from the house. When they showed up the next morning expecting a check, they found a locked door, a single envelope taped to the porch railing, and a neighbor who had no idea where I'd gone. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years building a plumbing supply business from a single delivery truck and a storage unit in Dayton, Ohio. I sold it 6 years ago for enough money that I never have to work another day, and I know exactly how lucky that makes me. My late wife Helen and I had one rule we never broke. You don't loan money to family. You either give it or you don't, because a loan to family isn't a loan. It's a slow-burning fuse. Helen died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 61. After she passed, I was the kind of lost that doesn't have a word for it. Not grief exactly. More like the whole map of your life suddenly has no legend. You know there's a destination somewhere, but you can't read any of the markings. My son, Trevor, helped me through that. I want to say that plainly because what came later doesn't erase what came before. He showed up every weekend for 3 months. He fixed the gutter I'd been ignoring. He sat with me on the back porch, and we didn't even talk half the time, just sat there, and that was enough. I love my son. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. He met Kristen about 6 years before Helen got sick. She was fine, I thought. Pleasant enough, organized. She had opinions about everything, the right neighborhood, the right school district, the right car for their tax bracket, but I figured that was just how some people were raised. I didn't look too hard at it. They have 2 kids, my granddaughter Lily, who just turned 9, and my grandson Owen, who's 6. Those 2 are the reason I stayed connected, even when the connection started feeling like a drain instead of a lifeline. The first time Trevor asked me for money, it was 3 years ago. $50,000. He said it was for a down payment on a rental property in Columbus. A duplex, good investment. He'd done the research. The numbers made sense. I asked to see the numbers. He brought me a spreadsheet. It looked reasonable. I wrote the check. I told him it was a gift, not a loan. Because that's what I'd always promised myself. I told him not to tell me what he did with it after that. I should have asked more questions. A year later, he came back. He and Kristen wanted to start a fitness studio. Pilates, cycling, that kind of thing. She had her certification. The location was good. They needed $75,000 to cover build-out and the first year of lease. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to an old friend who had been in commercial real estate. He said the business model was risky but not crazy. I gave them $60,000 and told them that was the ceiling. The studio opened. It limped along for about 14 months before Kristen decided the location was wrong and they needed to move, which meant another build-out, another deposit, more equipment. They didn't come to me that time. They took out a line of credit against their house. I didn't know that until much later. What I did know was that the calls started changing. Trevor used to call me to check in, to talk about the kids, to argue about football. Somewhere around the 2nd year after Helen died, the calls started having a texture to them. A kind of circling. He'd ask how I was doing, we'd talk for a few minutes, and then there'd be this pause, and I'd feel something coming. The way you feel a weather change in your knees before the sky shows it. Sometimes it was nothing. Sometimes it was a comment about the studio not hitting projections. Sometimes it was a question about my financial advisor, whether I'd moved anything around lately, what kind of returns I was seeing. I told myself I was reading too much into it. Last fall, the studio closed. I heard about it from a neighbor of theirs, not from Trevor. When I called him, he said they'd made a business decision, that it wasn't the right time for that market, that they were pivoting. He sounded tired and defensive, and I didn't push. I said I was sorry it hadn't worked out. I asked about the kids. We talked about Owen's soccer league for 10 minutes and hung up. 3 weeks later, Trevor and Kristen came to my house for Sunday dinner. I made a pot roast the way Helen used to, with the pearl onions and the rosemary. We ate. The kids ran around the backyard. It felt almost normal. After Lily and Owen went to watch a movie in the den, Kristen set down her wine glass and said, "We need to talk to you about something. I already knew in the way you know things you don't want to know." The fitness studio debt plus the line of credit they'd taken against the house, plus 3 credit cards they'd been carrying, came to just over $300,000. They were 30 days from missing a mortgage payment. Their credit was damaged enough that refinancing wasn't an option. Trevor had been interviewing for jobs, but nothing had come through yet. Kristen had found part-time work at a gym, not managing it, teaching classes, and that covered groceries. They needed $300,000. They needed it within 30 days. I sat there for a moment. I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he married. I looked at the backyard where Lily and Owen had been playing 20 minutes ago. I said, "That's a lot of money." Kristen said, "You can afford it." And she wasn't wrong about the math. She was wrong about everything else. Trevor said, "Dad, we don't have anywhere else to go." "You're it." He said it like a statement of fact, not an appeal. Like telling me the weather. I asked them to give me some time. A week. Trevor said they didn't have a week to waste. I said I understood, but I wasn't going to make a decision of that size in a single evening, and that was that. They left earlier than usual. Kristen didn't hug me goodbye. Trevor did, but it was brief, the kind of hug where a person's body has already left before their arms do. That night, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I have a window above the sink that faces the backyard, and there was enough moonlight to see the oak tree Helen and I planted the year we bought the house when Trevor was 6 years old. He used to climb that tree. He got stuck in it once and cried until I carried him down. He was so embarrassed. He made me promise not to tell anyone. I sat there and I thought about what I owed my son. I thought about all the ways I'd tried to give him advantages I didn't have. Private school. A car at 17. College fully paid, no loans. The gift of $50,000 when he was trying to get started. The $60,000 for the studio, money I gave freely because I had it, and he was my son, and that seemed like reason enough. I also thought about the word Kristen had used, afford. Not help, not please. Afford. Like proximity to money creates an obligation to share it. I called my attorney on Monday morning. His name is Harvey, and he has been my attorney for 22 years, and he is not the kind of man who tells you what you want to hear, which is the only kind of attorney worth having. I told him the situation. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me one question. What do you want the outcome to be? I thought about that for a long time. I did not want to watch my grandchildren lose their home. I did not want to watch my son drown. But I also I knew in my bones, the way you know things you've watched happen to other people, that if I wrote that check, nothing would change. The money would buy them time, not transformation. 6 months, a year, maybe 2. And then I'd be sitting across this same table from this same conversation, only the number would be bigger and the leverage would be smaller because they'd already have proof I would pay. I told Harvey what I wanted. We spent 3 days working out the details. On Thursday, I called Trevor. I told him I'd made a decision and I'd like them to come over Friday evening. He asked if it was good news. I said I thought it was, and I meant that. Friday, they came at 6. The kids were with Kristen's mother. We sat in the living room. I had 2 envelopes on the coffee table. I told them I wasn't going to give them $300,000. Kristen's jaw tightened. Trevor went very still. I told them what I was going to do instead. The first envelope held a letter from Harvey's office. I had set up an educational trust for Lily and Owen, fully funded, irrevocable, to cover 4 years of college each, plus a small amount for graduate school if they chose to pursue it. The money was already moved. It was the kids and nothing that happened between me and their parents could touch it. I told Trevor I was doing this not because I didn't trust him, but because this was the one thing I wanted to make sure was protected, no matter what. He looked at the letter for a long time. The second envelope held something different. I had found a non-profit credit counseling service, a legitimate one, accredited, not one of those debt settlement scams. I'd also spoken to a bankruptcy attorney, not to frighten them, but to get them real information. Chapter 13, reorganization, might let them keep the house. Trevor had a resume and real skills. There was a path. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. I told them I would pay for 3 months of credit counseling. I would pay for the bankruptcy attorney consultation. I would help Trevor with his resume and make some calls on his behalf to people in industries where I still had contacts. That was what I was offering. What I wasn't offering was the check. Kristen stood up. She said, "You're really going to let us lose our house?" I said, "I'm going to help you find a way to save it. That's different." She said, "Trevor's mother would have." I stood up. I stood up very slowly, the way I've learned to do things since my knees started complaining, and I looked at her and I said, "Don't." Just that one word. "Don't." She stopped. Trevor reached out and put his hand on her arm. He looked at me and I could see something complicated moving behind his eyes, anger and shame and something else, something younger, something that looked like the 6-year-old boy stuck in the oak tree who didn't want anyone to know he needed help. He said, "I need to think." I said, "Take whatever time you need." They left without touching the envelopes. I let them go. That night I went to my bedroom and I opened the top drawer of Helen's nightstand, which I haven't changed since she died. Her reading glasses are still there. A crossword puzzle book with her handwriting in the margins. A photograph of the 2 of us at Lily's first birthday. Both of us holding her, Helen laughing at something off camera, me looking at Helen instead of the baby. I held that photograph for a while. Then I made myself a cup of tea and I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote out a list. Not of finances, of what I actually wanted my life to look like for however many years I had left. It was the first time I'd done that since she died. At the top of the list I wrote, "See Lily and Owen grow up." 3 days went by. On the 4th day, Kristen called. She did not call to thank me. She called to tell me that what I was doing was selfish, that I was hiding behind principles, because I didn't actually love my son the way a real father would, that I had more than I would ever spend and I was choosing money over family. I let her say all of it. When she finished, I said, "I hear you. I love Trevor, and I love those kids. My offer stands." She hung up. 2 weeks passed. I went about my life. I had lunch with an old buddy from the business. I took a day trip up to Lake Erie, something I hadn't done in years. I got my car serviced. Small things. Real things. On a Tuesday morning, Trevor called. He didn't say much at first. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, "We called the credit counseling place." I said, "Okay." He said, "The attorney too." Another pause. "It's not as bad as we thought. The Chapter 13 thing, we might be able to keep the house." I said, "I'm glad." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I think I don't know. I've been letting her." He stopped. Started again. "I should have come to you differently." I didn't say anything for a moment, because I wanted to let that land where it needed to land without me rushing to smooth it over. I said, "I know you're in a hard place. I want to help you get through it, just not the way you asked." He said, "Yeah, and then can I bring the kids over Sunday?" I said, "I'll make pot roast." That was 8 months ago. The bankruptcy was approved. They're keeping the house. Trevor took a job as a regional operations manager for a facilities company. Not glamorous, but steady, good benefits. And he tells me he actually likes the work. Kristen is still teaching fitness classes. And from what Trevor says, she's building a real following. Neither of them has asked me for money since. Last Sunday, Lily helped me plant tomatoes in the garden. She was meticulous about it, measuring the spacing, reading the seed packet instructions out loud, telling me I was doing it wrong 3 separate times, which honestly reminded me so much of Helen that I had to turn away for a second and look at the fence line until I could breathe again. Owen found a salamander under a rock near the oak tree. He carried it around in his cupped hands for 20 minutes before Trevor made him put it back. Owen cried about it for a little while, and then forgot completely and went back to digging in the dirt. I watched them. I thought about the trust I'd set up. The money's sitting there, quiet and patient, waiting for them to be ready for it. It doesn't do anything right now, it just exists. A promise I kept to kids who don't know yet that it was ever made. I thought about what Kristen said, that I was choosing money over family. She had it exactly backward. There's a photograph on my refrigerator now. Lily drew it, me and her and Owen standing in front of the oak tree, all 3 of us holding fishing rods, even though there's no water in the backyard. Everyone's smiling, even the tree. I've got a hat on that, looks nothing like any hat I own. My arms are about 3 times too long. It's the best portrait I've ever seen. I keep thinking about the moment Trevor slid that number across the table. Not asked, stated. Like I was a bank he'd already decided to withdraw from, and I remember sitting there looking at my son who I carried out of an oak tree when he was 6 years old, and feeling something settle in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness exactly. More like clarity, the kind that only comes when you've run out of ways to avoid a truth you've been circling for years. I think about cause and effect a lot these days. Not in any mystical sense. I'm just a man who ran a business for 31 years and learned that outcomes follow decisions the way water follows gravity. It doesn't matter if the decisions were made out of love. It doesn't matter if you meant well. What you do becomes what happens. That's all. And what I had been doing, without fully realizing it, was teaching my son that difficulty had a solution, and the solution was me. Every time I wrote a check without asking hard questions, I was telling him something. I was telling him that his judgment didn't need to be tested, that the consequences of his choices had a ceiling I would hold up. I loved him, and I was making him fragile at the same time. Those 2 things were true simultaneously, and it took $300,000 worth of pressure to make me see it clearly. What I had to find, what I think any person has to find at some point, is the difference between caring about someone and carrying them. Caring means you want them to be okay. Caring means you've decided that their okay is your responsibility to manufacture. I had been carrying Trevor for years and calling it love, and he had let me, and neither of us had done the other any favors. The harder thing, the thing that actually required something from me, was to stop. To look at my son in real trouble and say, I believe you are capable of handling this. Not alone. I gave him tools, contacts, information, a clear path. But without the check that would have let him skip the work of becoming the person who doesn't end up here again. That took more out of me than writing the check would have. It would have been so much easier to just pay it. Kristen called me selfish. I've thought about that word a lot. I don't think she was entirely wrong. There was something I was protecting. Not my money, or not only my money. I was protecting my own integrity. The version of myself that Helen knew, the version that built something from nothing and understood that a thing only has value if it costs you something real. I wasn't willing to give that up, even for my son. Maybe especially for my son. Trevor is doing the work now. He shows up. He figures things out. Last Sunday, he fixed a slow drain in my kitchen without being asked and didn't say a word about it. I noticed. I didn't say anything either. Some things don't need to be named. Lily and Owen are going to be fine. The trust is there, quiet and patient, and someday they'll understand what it means. Or they won't, and they'll just go to college and live their lives, and that's fine too. The point was never for them to be grateful. The point was for it to be there. I look at that drawing on my refrigerator, the one with the fishing rods and the tree and my arms 3 times too long, and I think this is what I was protecting. Not an account balance. This.